As much as I would rather be talking about the Legends of Kingdom Rush mods that have come out recently, including a veteran difficulty for the game, I think it's more important to deliver some information about Ironhide's latest game. This is by far the cheekiest thing that Ironhide has ever done. I genuinely think that this could be the foundation of a scientific study if anyone would be able to replicate this. Less than a year ago, a game released under the name Battle Towers by a game company called One Button Studios, which was located in London. This game garnered a variety of opinions. Many people hated it for being the umpteenth game from a random studio to rip off Kingdom Rush. Many people, including some of its haters, still had to hand it to the game for having its own art rather than just stealing Ironhide's designs, and being pretty good art at that. But then, there were other people who said this game's art was AI generated because of the oddities of some of its designs and shading. Between being seen as a ripoff and having odd design decisions in its gameplay, Battle Towers earned the nickname Slop Rush. But even with many haters, the fact that this game was a PvP Kingdom Rush game was enough that many people, including some of the haters, went through the effort of installing a VPN just to play this game. Turns out, Battle Towers is actually Ironhide's own work, Kingdom Rush Battles. After 14.5 years, Ironhide finally made a multiplayer game. As a fun fact, Legends was originally meant to be a multiplayer game as well, but it was reworked into what it is now. That's not me segueing into talking about the Legends mods, I just wanted to share some info. While I'm at it, I also want to mention that the evidence was all there for you to discover yourself. First, if you looked at Ironhide's official website at this time, they were looking to hire developers who have experience with multiplayer game design in Unity. If that isn't enough evidence, the feedback form that the game comes with also includes a clause at the bottom saying that Ironhide is the owner of the form. People who saw this still didn't want to accept that this was made by Ironhide, but now that the jig is up, it's funny to see how the public opinion has shifted about this game. People are a lot more excited about it now that they know it's made by Ironhide themselves. Not only is this a relief for people who could see merit in the game, but thought that it was a ripoff, but it's also a fresh concept for people who want the Kingdom Rush formula brought into a PvP environment. If you want to access this game itself, it has a limited release. The current version of it is effectively an open beta, but only to servers in Uruguay, Indonesia, and the Philippines. You also can only access it on mobile devices for now, not on Steam. In other words, if you got a bad spawn, you'll have to do some technology magic to get it to work. Hopefully the comments here or Reddit can help you with that, because I get to play it as a US citizen thanks to my beta tester privileges. So how does a PvP Kingdom Rush game work? Similar to the original games, you have strategic points in which you can build towers by spending gold. Your tower options are determined by what is in your deck, which can hold 4 towers max. We will get to how that deck is filled later. What's important now is knowing that, in-game, you have 4 tower options to pick from. Besides that, you also have a hero unit, which comes with multiple abilities. You get 3 spells, which you also pick from a deck. These include the classics like Reinforcements and Rain of Fire, while also introducing some new stuff like an AoE stun that deals no damage. And finally, at the start of every wave, you get to pick a booster, which is a buff to you or a debuff to the enemy player. A single match only has 6 waves, so you get 6 boosters total to pick from. These boosters are pretty straightforward, just multiplying your own stats, spawning extra enemies for the other player, and disabling their units and towers. You can pick 3 types of boosters per game, then the only options you get are further upgrades to the ones you already picked. These have diminishing returns until you've upgraded one of them 3 times, where the final upgrade costs gold to get, but is a way stronger effect. I'm a big fan of having this option to greed in a game for a stronger effect. Each wave consists of randomly generated enemies from a pool that's related to the arena you're playing in. So every environment will consistently spawn the same kinds of enemies, just not in the same order or magnitude. You can't see what enemies are in these waves, but there is a guaranteed boss on the last wave. As you play against these waves, there is an enemy player whose screen you can see on top of your own screen. They get the same starting gold in enemy waves as you, but they have their own loadout of towers, spells, and hero to use, as well as their own booster choices. Each player has 3 lives, meaning that they can afford to leak 2 lives, but the 3rd leak instantly loses the match. If you both manage to survive to the end, the player who kills their boss wave first wins. This game has a couple of changes from the single-player Kingdom Rushes that I welcome wholeheartedly. First, there is no more two-ta-ta. This was the tactic nicknamed by the War Champion, where you would rally a unit out of melee combat with an enemy while that enemy was in its attack animation, dodging the attack's damage. This could be done infinitely with many units, and it was abused in order to have effectively unlimited HP to stall a unit with, as you would be able to take 0 damage while not letting an enemy move. While some argue that this tactic was skill-based and thus should be allowed in the game, players could abuse this so hard that even Cronin could stall the bottom island of Sunkett Citadel on Veteran without any towers built there to help him. Cronin. That's too far in my opinion, and apparently the developers agree. So now, units are locked in their animations as soon as they start them, so everything is more deliberate. Yes, this does mean that skills like Gerald's Courage can be really annoying, as he will keep activating the skill instead of blocking anyone, but if it means that you can't perma-stall bosses anymore, it's a sacrifice worth making. Second, rather than being able to call waves early to earn extra gold, if you defeat all of the enemies in the wave first, you start earning gold for every second that the enemy player is still working on finishing off their wave, up to a maximum of 66 from my testing. This might seem like it encourages you to never run stalling towers, or rather to always run the fastest damaging towers, but that is only true for the first 5 waves. When the boss arrives, you can better multiply your damage against it by combining some damage towers with stalling towers, so you have to find a balance if you want to win in the late game. That kind of depth is great for the game. Third, thanks to the existence of an enemy player, we can now see effects that don't just damage our own enemies, but can also buff the opponent's enemies or affect them in other ways. The Necromancer Tower, and yes, I know, of course the Necromancer's here, doesn't raise the dead to fight on your path anymore. Instead, it turns slain enemies into skeletons that attack the other player. That's a great spin on the tower and makes it have a unique viability compared to other towers. You can try building a deck that's focused on swarming your opponent at the cost of personal strength, which is really fun to do. There are some negative changes that come with the game as well though. For instance, microing units is more annoying now because you can't easily tap on the location you want to send them to. Instead, it prioritizes selecting a new unit if you try to move that unit to the same place as that current unit that you're selecting now, even though you usually want to stack units on top of each other. I heard that this will be fixed though, so I won't be mentioning other things that are claimed to be in the works. After a match, you earn what is effectively XP for the things in your deck. However, the XP has nothing to do with what you used. This is how you end up getting more cards to use for your deck, while also leveling up the stuff that you currently have. Since these rewards are random, the stuff that your opponent has will most likely be slightly different. This is where the first slop rush criticisms begin to appear. First, you can get matched up against accounts, including bot accounts, with differently leveled cards than you. In these two images, you can see that a level 9 card has less than half the damage of a level 10 card, so the player with the level 10 version of the tower is at a massive advantage. To be honest, I am not sure what tower levels even add to the game. Sure, it's a form of progression to look forward to, but it's a double-edged sword at best because it also creates a sense of despair thanks to the matchmaking. If you're the one with lower level cards, it's not a fair matchup and therefore not a fun or worthwhile experience. At best, you can feel a false sense of superiority by crushing people who are lower level than you. The elephant in the room here is that this mechanic is here to stay because it's there to encourage people to rage at the game and then spend money while they're emotional to level up their cards to match. But since the chests that contain this XP will give you random rewards, it means that the money you spend is literally gambling, which is illegal in many places because it's scientifically proven to be dangerously addicting. So I definitely see why this is a criticism levied at the game. Another criticism is of the art style. Although the game beat the Ironhide ripoff allegations, it now has to fight the Clash Royale and Bloons Battles ripoff allegations. When it comes to Bloons, I think that this is only being said because it's a PvP tower defense game. Bloons Battles doesn't have spells, hero micro in the same way, or boosters between rounds, so I won't bother giving this argument any more attention. As someone who has never played Clash Royale and knows next to nothing about it, I can definitely still see the overlap in the art, specifically the UI. All the buttons and the layout of the UI are nearly one-to-one. This leads to my rant on what it means to be a ripoff. As a fan of the Souls series since 2011, I've seen some curious opinions on games that are similar to one another. When Lords of the Fallen first came out in 2014, people were excited to try the game out because it had effectively the same stamina system, two-handed weapon system, recovering XP system, and more from Dark Souls. Under another lens, you could very easily call this a ripoff of the Souls games, but instead, people were happy to see the same mechanics reused in another game. Of course, there were some mechanical differences, but the actual sequels in that franchise had more differences between each other than Lords of the Fallen had with Dark Souls 1. So, why do games like Lords of the Fallen get the positive label of Souls-like for having a lot of overlap with another more popular game, while Battles gets the label ripoff and slop rush when it's similar to Clash Royale? Dark Souls was praised for its gameplay and mechanics, which is what Souls-like games are copying. Fans are happy with that because it's more of a good thing. However, no one I know of is praising Clash Royale for its art. If anything, people were praising Ironhide for its art. So the thing people want more of would be the Ironhide art style, not the Clash Royale art style. Why not use the bright browns and the wooden aesthetic that the Kingdom Rush games have been known for? If Ironhide copied the UI layout and organization, but recolored it with a Kingdom Rush flavor, I think this criticism would be far less common and way less valid. One of my own gripes is that this game is obsessed with you being online for everything. When I first was going to play the game, I couldn't, because for some reason, the tutorial also requires you to be connected to the internet, even though it's a scripted bot game. Another thing worth mentioning is how the UI shows every bit of XP being poured into a card in the animation when you upgrade it, even though it's only buying one tier of the upgrade. Luckily, it doesn't waste the actual XP. The final major criticism about this game is with regards to skill. Like any PvP game, it should be skill-based in order to make it enjoyable. I personally am not a competitive person, so I don't enjoy the same appeal that many other people get from competing against other people in a game. But even I understand why people like to sharpen their skills and try out new tech against a real, thinking opponent. So if the game isn't skillful enough, the joy of victory or even playing will be diminished. How does Battles achieve skillful gameplay? Well, it's still quite early to be making a definitive statement, but so far, the consensus is that skill is competing with luck to be the win condition in this game. Not only can a player luck their way to victory by overpowering their opponent with straight up better cards on spawn, but even in a perfectly mirrored matchup, there is still RNG in the game. Nothing in this world can be said to be certain except death, taxes, and RNG in an Ironhide game. Never has the existence of tower and unit damage ranges been more problematic than it is here. You can have randomly spawned enemies all you want, that isn't an issue. But once those enemies spawn, the skills that should be tested are the ability to come up with a strategy that counters these enemies, the dexterity to execute that strategy, and the speed with which they can do both of these things. However, when you randomly roll a number for the damage of your own solutions to these obstacles, it doesn't feel as much like you're solving a puzzle that was suddenly presented to you. Instead, you're hoping that your solution rolls high enough that you finish the waste faster than your opponent so you can start generating gold sooner. You're hoping that you get low damage rolls from the enemies so that your units can survive longer. You should be hoping less and doing more if you want the game to be skillful. Another skill in this game would be deck building. So in order to simply have options, you need to get lucky across the metagame to obtain more options. That's fine on paper. However, this sort of system demands that the options be balanced yet distinct, and I simply don't think that this game will ever be balanced. With the existence of rarity among cards, you can bet that legendary heroes and towers and spells will forever be these shiny, covetable options to tempt you into spending real money to obtain them by making them stronger than the more common options. I know that sounds cynical of me, so I hope Ironhide can prove me wrong by balancing these options in order to make the rarity only scale with the coolness factor of the cards. At the moment though, these options are definitely not equally balanced. One of the reasons that I dislike PvP in most cases is that it all boils down to rock, paper, scissors most of the time. At the highest level of gameplay, when everyone can execute every tactic perfectly, the only way to separate winners from losers in a skillful environment is to be able to read the opponent. If you can predict what your opponent is going to do, then even if they execute their game plan perfectly, if you can perfectly execute the counter to their move, then you will succeed. In the case of Battles, the rock, paper, scissors aspect happens both before and during the gameplay. The during aspect of it is great. You pick the booster that you think will best counter their tactics and possibly outpace the booster that they pick. That requires some thinking and application of experience. But before battle, let's say for example that you're using the Necromancer in your deck. All of its skeletons are going to be useless if the enemy player has sufficient artillery in their own deck. So you're basically playing with one less tower because the only way the Necromancer can be balanced is if the skeletons still have a counter, and that counter makes the tower weaker without its skeletons. Otherwise, by definition, the Necromancer would be just as strong as another mage, but it would also get the skeleton bonus, so it would always be OP. But the only way for the dwarf to be balanced is if it's one of the counters to the necromancer, because what's the point of a full range AoE tower if it doesn't clear out fodder effectively? So in the end, the best case scenario is this rock paper scissors dynamic. Like I said, I'm not a fan of rock paper scissors to begin with, but I can see why people enjoy it, and I think that this example that I just gave shouldn't be a problem for players. While it might be annoying to have a whole tower in your deck countered by another tower, as long as there are enough other options at all times so that you can still express skill in your gameplay, this is just part of the nature of PvP. So, how is the fundamental skill expression in the gameplay? Tower synergies have more potential than ever in this game, now that there can be effects that interact with the other player. However, on the player's own map, it is a bit more difficult to get these sorts of synergies without a proper amount of gold or tower spots. This game is fortunately not a gold starve, but rather it is a space starve, unfortunately. Ever since Vengeance, Ironhide levels have had this priority to make choke points harder to form by simply turning viable strategic point spaces into scenery, or worse, empty space. That's never been more apparent than here, where you have enough tower spaces to get 2 or maybe 3 towers in range of each other, while the rest are part of their own little spaces. A player should not have so few tower spots that the gold they get fills up every good spot, even though they are only building 6 towers on average. Would the game not have more skill expression if there were more tower spots total, so there were more possible combinations of setups to choose from, each with their own advantages and disadvantages? With the existence of boosters and all the new effects that could interact with other players, you could discourage choke points by simply introducing effects that punish this sort of gameplay, such as making towers who are within a certain range of each other all debuff each other by a percentage of attack speed. Then, this would be a counter to the player strategy that you can pick yourself, rather than something forced onto both players innately by the game design. Tower and hero skills also activate automatically. For heroes, this is mostly fine since you can micro them into range to trigger skills, and thus control it. Though, it is still annoying for Gerald and Deirdre to keep buffing units when you want them to move. Deirdre can target herself with her armor buff, and it's on a 9-second cooldown, so she's constantly having steam moments and thus unable to listen to orders. Stuff like that is annoying, but that can be rebalanced. Where I think the game is missing out on a fundamental opportunity is with tower skills. These also activate automatically when their cooldown is complete. Skills also trigger instantly once you buy them, so it's already possible to time them and desync their cooldowns to spawn kill a hero, for instance. In other words, any counter-argument about this being an imbalanced suggestion is already arguing against the current design anyways. It would be best if timing these skills was an intentional part of the design and they were balanced around that, rather than the way it is now. It's still possible to spawn cap units or permastall towers, which should only be the result of extreme unpunished greed if at all, not something you can usually casually achieve. My suggestion is that tower skills could be activated Junk World style. When its skill is ready, towers will glow, replacing the glow for when you have enough gold to upgrade a tower since that's unnecessary. When you tap on the tower, the skill icon for the ability that's ready is also glowing, so you tap on that to activate the ability right away. The ability would have rebalanced stats, which it needs anyways, so the point is that you might as well make the game more skillful in the process of this balancing sweep. It rewards attentive players who can keep their eyes on their own battlefield to survive and their opponent's battlefield to find the right time for a skill. As it stands, the opponent's battlefield is hardly something you need to keep an eye on. This is a massively ambitious suggestion that's unrealistic. That being said, the developers are actively looking at tons of feedback from all over the internet, and sometimes even responding to it thoroughly. From what I know, they're going to address many criticisms by the time the game is fully released anyways, so it's better to stick to analyzing fundamentals. In that area, most of my critiques are not that major. I do believe that this game has skill expression, and I believe that it is currently tapping into its potential as a PvP Kingdom Rush game. That's huge, considering how much potential I saw in Alliance that I felt was never actually realized after many content updates. Battles has, in my opinion, the most potential out of any Ironhide game thanks to all of the possible interactions you can have with another player. There's literally another dimension that you can access with this game. In fact, it actually inspires me with tons of ideas, like a Tribal Axe Thrower's tower, whose Silence Totem can prevent the enemy's towers from using skills, or a Mausoleum, whose possession ability can teleport enemies to the other player's side, making it their problem instead. Oh wait, the Archmage already does that. Oh well. And then there's heroes. Can you imagine a Durax hero who's weaker than your average hero, but spawns a controllable clone on the player's side that you can use to wreak havoc and sabotage them? The reason why I'm invested in the potential of this game is simple. Battles is actually fun. I enjoyed unlocking new towers, heroes, and spells to try out all of the combinations. The gameplay loop is genuinely entertaining. With different waves every time, even if you choose to play the same tower setups, it still feels like you're making that choice deliberately. To think that playing against bots is fun should suggest something about the potential that this game is already reaching, let alone still has to offer. So, my number one advice to Ironhide going forward is to never give up on this game. Please, pour the heart and soul that went into Pirate Kings into this game. Make all of the interactions and new effects that you possibly can, because this will help the game's longevity and help it stand out as a PvP game with an emphasis on having fun. Surpass Bloons battles by having so many possible combinations that this game has more depth than that game and its sequel. Use the fact that Ironhide has always made the most delicately crafted, high-quality levels in the tower defense genre to create the most skill-based, deepest tower defense PvP game on the market. You've got this. Anyways, since I'm not Uruguayan, Indonesian, or Filipino, I'm going back to modding Legends.